This simulation is obsessed with order. It hands you effortless grids. It demands 90-degree angles. It bribes you with green efficiency bars and happy little citizens. It wants you to be a god of geometry, a master of a flawless machine. But look closely. Cities don't look like this. This feels like plastic. Real cities aren't designed by algorithms. They are scarred by history. They are messy. They are broken. Perfection is not the goal. Perfection is the enemy. To build something real, you have to stop playing the game and start ruining it.
And we're back into the game. Welcome back to Monte Palma. This was the update everybody was dreading, the introduction of the asset editor. Everybody thought it would break the game in ways that the mods weren't going to be able to fix, but here we are, we're back in. Everything is functional. I haven't really seen any huge problems, so that's wonderful. We can continue on with our story without any huge interruptions. Now, this week's episode is going to be a little different in structure. The update took several days to actually work its way through all the mod updates and stuff, and I had other stuff going on. I also wasn't feeling all that great, so I didn't have the time to put together a proper historic narration component to this particular episode. This is going to be more focused on process and just some detailing of a small residential neighborhood up on the hillside here. If we want to think about it historically in context with the rest of the region, this probably would have been just at some point in the history, just a small hillside village. In modern times, it's being completely absorbed into the greater metropolitan area of our capital, and now is just a quiet little residential neighborhood with, at the very top, we're going to be creating a little town square, which would have been the original village, and we're going to have a small collection of commercial buildings right around the town square. The rest of the neighborhood's going to be commercial. This area, this square would have probably had a church on it. Still don't have church assets. Hopefully with the asset editor, those will come soon. I'm going to put a building in here that vaguely resembles a church. It could be a community center or a church or something. It's not too important here. I'm also just going to be putting down a collection of buildings around the town square here. I'm going to be switching out the surface here, just picking some buildings that seem appropriate in height for this area. I don't want buildings at the very top of the hill here to be too high. I want them to kind of blend into the hillside. For the most part, I'm using European beachfront or commercial buildings here with maybe a few North American old town commercial buildings as well. I thought this would be a good opportunity to kind of reflect a bit back on the building strategy I'm using for creating this particular region, the region of Monte Palma, and how I'm kind of approaching city building. This is probably the way I'm going to be approaching city building from now on, regardless of what type of city I'm building or where it might be located in the world. Trying to go for a sense of realism. I'm trying to build places that feel like actual places that you could visit in the real world. The game can do this to a certain extent, but it does kind of fall flat. We always have to remember it is a game and it's trying to incorporate game mechanics into how everything works. And a lot of the times that just doesn't really line up properly with what we experience in the real world, how cities really exist. City Skylines is great for building cities that are, have a grid orientation. It does not do very well for cities that fall outside of that, cities with centuries worth of history, which is a huge chunk of the cities across the world don't fall necessarily into a grid format. Of course, most modern cities do. Grid layouts have been part of city development now for probably a couple centuries, so it's a safe bet for gameplay. But for realism, it always just seems to fall a bit short. Also, like what I'm doing here with building on hillsides. Buildings conform to terrain a lot of the time. They not usually the other way around unless you're building a giant shopping mall. Small residential houses on the hillside, like I'm trying to depict here, we have to get a little more creative. And what I end up doing is stacking them, placing them by hand. It's like trying to play with a set of Legos here, trying to get everything to fit together. The vanilla assets on their ploppable with their zonable lots, everything is square. Everything is perfectly 90-degree angles. Everything has a fence around it. What I've always found is a lot of the times that is just not what I'm trying to build, especially in a place like Monte Palma with centuries of history, in a place in the world where poverty is much more prominent than it would be, say, in a North American or European city. City infrastructure would be a lot more lax, so things develop in a much more organic way. The game really fights you on this, and it really doesn't want you to build this, so you have to think outside the box, and that does require playing outside of the bounds of what the game intends sometimes. And I'm okay with that. There's many different ways you can approach playing Cities Skylines 2. This is a lot more fun for myself personally. Obviously, many other people are more interested in the simulation. I enjoy the simulation, but I don't let the simulation dictate what it is I'm going to build. I'm the one who decides the visual look of my city, not the mechanics of the game, and certainly not the simulation. So we bend the simulation to our will. I still like the simulation. It obviously creates the whole underlying, it gives the city life. So I do try to accommodate the simulation where possible. I am not a slave to it, and I don't build the city to satisfy the needs of the simulation. So for this particular build, we're going to have a little hilltop community, residential. And as we move down the hillsides and stuff, as we approach the main roads, we'll put in a few high rises and stuff. But it's going to be, for the most part, low density residential. We're going to be packing it in pretty tight. This is the idea of like property value. People who can afford expensive homes like what I'm building right here at the top of the hill, I'm actually using the vanilla buildings with their lots, because these people up here have a bit more money. They actually have yards around their property. The people a little farther down the hill, the value of their properties are cheaper, they have less money, they are less wealthy, so everything is packed in together a lot more densely. And as we get down to the bottom of the hill, we now transition completely into apartment buildings. To achieve this look, I mostly use static assets, so just prop versions of the building, and I add my own functionality. This way I get to control how this neighborhood functions, exactly how many people live here, and all that sort of stuff. And it allows me to be a little more creative with my placement of my buildings. Once again, it's mostly about getting the buildings to conform to terrain, not the other way around. Whenever you put down a vanilla asset, it comes with a lot that will flatten out the terrain. There's so many examples in the world where that simply is not the case. And it's really unfortunate that the game, for whatever reasons, has decided that's just not something they're going to do. We're always stuck in this situation where we're going to have to fake it. As we get close to the industrial port area, we're going to switch over to a few commercial buildings. Once again, I'm not necessarily being controlled by the simulation, but I am listening to what the simulation is telling me, and it's telling me I need office. So we're going to disguise a bit of office buildings associated with some of the industry down here. And because I don't work in grids, at least not for this city, obviously other cities would have much more of a grid orientation to them. This city, quite a lot of it doesn't, at least the older parts. So I have to figure out ways to fill in some of these awkward spaces. And all these awkward spaces, some of the best uses for them is just some custom parking lots. It's a great way to incorporate extra parking. It's something you see in real life all the time. Just odd shaped parking lots are common pretty much everywhere in the world. Drawing them in by hand, I always think this is a good strategy. See here, the neighborhood's starting to fill in. I'm not focusing too much on placing every building. I have other episodes where I do this, and you can go back and watch those. So we're going to kind of speed through some of the construction here. Because I'm using the prop versions of these buildings and they don't conform to terrain, we have to get creative with hiding some of the imperfections. Luckily for Monte Palma is it's essentially a tropical rainforest, so we have the luxury here of using trees to hide some of the imperfections. Of course, if I was doing this in a drier environment, I would have to figure out a different strategy. It just happens to be, for the particular climate we're in, trees are a very easy way to do this and totally appropriate for what we're doing. As we move closer to the highway, we're going to switch over to more apartment buildings. also spent a lot of time splicing buildings together to create new and interesting looks, make the architecture feel a little more varied than what it actually is in game. I've been looking at custom assets. I haven't seen anything quite yet that I want to import into Monte Palma, so you're not going to see anything in this episode. I'm giving it a couple weeks to see what starts to fill in the workshop there and see what actually might be usable and what to ignore. So that'll take a couple weeks to sort out. Okay, now that I've laid out most of the buildings, we're going to switch over into the detailing. Now for the very top here, where the properties that actually have yards, we're going to turn this into a gated community. So I'm using some of these kiosks from the vanilla game, and we're going to use those as gatehouses. I'm just going to add a fence around here. So the very front, or where it's most visible, we're going to put in a very nice brick fence. For the gates itself, we're going to be using the gates from the Netherlands Cemetery. These are quite nice. I give everything a recolor so it matches. The fence doesn't conform to the terrain very well here, so we're going to try disguising it this slightly with a few potted plants. We also have a second entrance here on the side, and we're just going to do the same thing. We're going to create a little gatehouse here as well. And on the back side, where it's not very important and not very many people are going to see it, we're just going to put in a chain link fence. The fences around the property are a bit distorted, so we're going to delete those, and we're going to stretch out the existing surfaces to meet the road. Just tidy all the surfaces up so it looks nice. Going to be using a net lane to cover up these pristine looking roads. I am very much looking forward to some custom road assets eventually getting into the game here. Custom road assets where the textures are actually baked into the road. I can't wait to start seeing some of those pop up on the workshop. This entire neighborhood I'm working on, it's an area where we're not going too crazy on the detailing, treating it as an area for medium level of detailing. I try to categorize where I spend most of my energy detailing. Points of interest, like real important areas of the city, get full-on detailing. Other areas get kind of a mid-level amount of detailing, and other areas get minimal amount of detailing. It all really depends on how visible it is or how important it is in the city. What I noticed in the last week's episode was I might have went a little light on the detailing. So this episode, what I'm trying to do is I'm still trying to figure out what is like an appropriate amount of detailing to sell the look, but it also, allows me to work fairly quickly, so I'm not spending so much time detailing out one square block. I will do that for something that's really important, but I can't do it for the entire city, and trying to determine where it's appropriate and where I can kind of do a little less. I'm still working my way through it. One thing I've come to realize is most bang for your buck for detailing is surfaces on the ground surfaces, and for Monte Palma in particular, detailing the roofs. This allows me to get most of the way there of the detailing, because a lot of times this is how your primary view of these buildings are going to be from overhead, from a top-down thing. Yeah, detailing the roofs, making them look like they've been out, in a tropical environment is really the easiest thing to do. For some of the taller high-rises here, also just a little bit of detailing to the sides, to indicate that the climate is having an effect on these buildings. Fairly common is laundry drying on the balconies here. We're using some of the clothesline assets here, and we're just going to move them into place. right along the highway here, we're going to add some surfaces to break up the grass. There's going to be some drier grass along the tree edge, and right along the road edge, we're going to be adding some dirt surfaces just to blend things in a little better here. With Monte Palma, the land use is a bit chaotic. So it's very common to have industrial areas right up against residential areas. I'm using service cubes here to give the industry, to create functional industries. The nice thing about using the service cubes is they don't produce any pollution. So we can put them directly beside residential and there's no issues. For gameplay, it's maybe a bit hacky, but also in reality, that's, not all industry is polluting or noisy in that sense, and you can have residential neighborhoods directly beside them. It's more a matter of property values, right? So obviously the property values here would be lower than, say, farther away from the industrial areas, which also determines the type of neighborhood and the type of people who would live there. And, for poorer people, yeah, they're going to have to live in neighborhoods that are less desirable. That's another thing the game doesn't really capture very well. Poverty is treated as something that you must eliminate from your city. It's not accepted as the reality many people live with on a day-to-day level. And I will say, for the intro video there, that is just a complete vanilla city that everything is zoned. To play the game in that way, which I haven't done for quite a while now, was a bit refreshing. I totally forget about the actual gameplay of just letting the game be a game. And it was quite a lot of fun. And it took maybe a couple hours to build up that fake little city there. Trickier areas to build out here were the neighborhoods directly adjacent to what was already built in the last episode, just integrating them in so they all feel like they're part of the same place. Conforming the buildings to the hillside really does help. I mean, it really, when you get down to street level and you look up some of the streets and you can see the road climbing up the hillside and the buildings beside it, get some very nice sight lines from certain parts of the build now, which I really, really like. And that's kind of what everything I try to do here is from the perspective of from the ground level or from, say, like a drone flying at low altitude over the city. That's kind of how I build from those sorts of perspectives. I don't spend a whole lot of time here adding a whole bunch of little actual prop details like benches and garbage cans and all that sort of stuff. Most of the time it's not necessary for most of the city. Obviously for points of interest I will go to that, that level of detail, but for other parts I usually find it's not that important. in the last episode, I found this nice little trick. We're using the pillars that support the leisure piers. They're a separate prop that we can choose, and we're going to use them to create our own little custom billboards here. They do interact with the ground. Hopefully somebody comes up with a version of them that doesn't do that. So they are somewhat limited, but I think they look really nice for like kind of like a handmade billboard type of situation. For the residential area, I'll show you little highlights of this. It gets very repetitive, so I don't want to bore people with this over and over again, but it's essentially using the plants to fill in all the gaps and the odd spaces, hide some of the imperfections where the buildings don't match the terrain quite perfectly. So we just come in here and use the trees to hide all that. And for the purpose of this view here, we can see it's really, this neighborhood is meant to be backdrop for other views of the city. What I'm really looking for here is a visual density of buildings crawling up the hillside. And for the very top here, this is just going to be probably some sort of park area. I haven't really determined what exactly this is yet. We're just going to fill it in with trees. The trees at the very top are slightly smaller, younger trees than the ones down by the road. I think it just visually looks interesting that way. Here's something interesting I've noticed, like all the people hanging out in the pier. There's a lot of people down here, especially as we get over to this one. I'm like, what are they all doing down there? And I come in to take a close look, and oh my God, they're fishing, which is so cool. Unfortunately, yeah, who fishes like that? That's gonna be like a nightmare. Love the mechanic. It definitely needs a bit of tweaking to spread people out just a little bit more than what's happening there. But I think that's just so cool. I love seeing that. And I love this corridor here from the main road, just how this all turned out in here. I think this is a really nice view. And I'm just going to do a bit of final detailing up here. Residential neighborhood at the top of the hill around the town square. that's kind of it for this episode. Next episode, we'll be back into our regular format, back to our history narrative and all that sort of stuff. This week, I just didn't have the time to get that all put together. It felt like it's been 2 weeks. So I thought, I just want to get an episode out there, show you what progress is being made. If you made it to the very end, thank you so much. Watching to the end of the video is the best signal you can send the YouTube algorithm to show this video to more people. So if you're still here, thank you. And once again, I will see you all in the next episode.